Helen Morrison had been organizing books at the Willowbrook Community Library for 8 years, and most people barely noticed her. At 65, with graying brown hair tied back in a neat bun and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, she moved quietly through the stacks like a gentle ghost. To the teenagers studying for exams and the mothers reading to their children, she was just another helpful librarian who always knew exactly where to find the book you needed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What nobody knew was that Helen Morrison was about to become the most talked about person in military history. The woman who spent her days recommending romance novels and helping with homework research was hiding a secret that would save lives and change everything anyone thought they knew about heroes hiding in plain sight. Helen had moved to the small town of Willowbrook after what she called early retirement from government work. She'd bought a modest house 3 blocks from the library, planted a vegetable garden, and settled into a routine that felt like heaven after decades of chaos. Every morning at 7:30, she'd arrive at the library with a thermos of coffee and a brown bag lunch. She'd unlock the doors, turn on the lights, and begin the peaceful work of organizing knowledge. The Willowbrook Community Library sat just 12 miles from Camp Thunderbolt, one of the military's most important training facilities. Soldiers often came into town on weekends, and Helen treated them the same way she treated everyone else, with quiet kindness and genuine interest in helping them find what they needed. She'd helped young recruits find books on everything from motorcycle repair to poetry, never asking questions, never making them feel judged. Private Tyler Jackson, a 20-year-old from Montana, had become one of her regular visitors. He'd started coming in to use the computers for video calls with his girlfriend back home, but had begun checking out books on military history. "Mrs. Morrison," he'd say, "you always know exactly what I'm looking for before I even ask." Helen would smile and hand him another biography of a famous general or a detailed account of a historic battle, somehow always picking exactly the right book for what he needed to learn. What Tyler and the other soldiers didn't notice were the subtle things that might have given away Helen's true background. The way she automatically scanned every room when she entered, her eyes moving to corners and exits with practiced efficiency. How she never sat with her back to a door, always positioning herself where she could see everyone coming and going. The fact that she could estimate distances with uncanny accuracy, telling patrons exactly how many steps it was to the reference section or the restroom. Staff Sergeant Nathan Cole had noticed a few things that didn't quite add up. He'd been coming to the library for 6 months, researching military tactics for a promotion exam, and there was something about the way Helen moved that suggested someone familiar with military discipline. She had perfect posture, never wasted motion, and had an ability to move completely silently through the library, even when carrying stacks of heavy books. "There's something different about that librarian," Cole had mentioned to his buddy, Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, during lunch at the base. "She's not just any civilian." "What do you mean?" Santos had asked, biting into her sandwich. "Watch her sometime. She moves like someone who's been trained, really trained. And she knows more about military history than most of our instructors." Santos had laughed. "Cole, you're seeing things. She's just a nice old lady who likes books." But Cole's casual observations would soon prove more accurate than he could have imagined. Because on this particular Tuesday morning, as Helen was arranging new releases on the front display table, an emergency was developing at Camp Thunderbolt. That would change everything. The crisis had started during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. A group of foreign military observers visiting to evaluate joint training procedures had been taken hostage by a domestic terrorist cell that had somehow infiltrated the base. The situation was contained to a single building, but the hostages were in immediate danger. Colonel James, Mitchell's voice crackled through the base's emergency communication system. "This is not a drill. We have a code red situation. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately." The base's elite sniper team had been deployed to Afghanistan just 2 weeks earlier. The backup team was conducting training exercises in Alaska and wouldn't be back for 72 hours. The nearest qualified snipers were at Fort Bragg, over 400 miles away too, far to help with a situation that was deteriorating by the hour. Intelligence reports indicated that the terrorists had positioned themselves strategically throughout the building, with sight lines that made a traditional assault impossible. They needed a marksman capable of making precision shots from extended range, someone who could neutralize threats without endangering the hostages. Captain Ryan Brooks, the base's tactical operations officer, was frantically making phone calls. "What do you mean there's nobody available?" he shouted into his radio. "We've got 12 hostages and 3 armed terrorists. And you're telling me we don't have a single qualified sniper on the entire East Coast?" The response was devastating. Budget cuts had reduced sniper training programs. Personnel shortages had spread qualified marksmen thin across multiple theaters of operation. The very skills that Camp Thunderbolt needed to save lives were simply not available. Commander Mitchell gathered his senior staff in the Emergency Operations Center. The mood was grim. "Gentlemen, we're looking at our options. We can wait for the team from Fort Bragg, but intelligence suggests the terrorists are becoming increasingly agitated. We may not have 6 hours. What about local law enforcement?" asked Lieutenant Ashley Price. "State police have a SWAT team, but they're not equipped for this type of precision shooting. The distances involved and the building's architecture require military-grade marksmanship skills." The room fell silent. 12 lives hung in the balance, and they were out of options. That's when the emergency radio crackled to life with an unexpected message. "Camp Thunderbolt, this is Willowbrook Library. I understand you have a situation requiring a marksman. I may be able to help." Every head in the room turned toward the radio. Captain Brooks grabbed the microphone. "Willowbrook Library, please identify yourself." The voice that came back was calm, professional, and completely unexpected. "This is Helen Morrison. I'm a librarian, and I believe I have the skills you need." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, laughter began to build around the room. A librarian? A civilian? Offering to help with a military crisis that their own trained professionals couldn't handle? But Helen Morrison wasn't finished talking. And what she was about to say would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman who had been organizing their hometown library for 8 years. "I'm former military," her voice continued through the radio, steady and sure. "Call sign Phantom 1. I have the qualifications you need, and I'm 12 minutes away." The laughter stopped immediately. Phantom 1, several of the senior officers exchanged glances. That call sign was legendary in certain circles, but the sniper who had earned it was supposed to be a ghost, someone whose identity was so classified that most people weren't even sure they existed. And now that ghost was offering to drive over from the local library to save 12 hostages. Colonel Mitchell grabbed the radio personally. "Phantom 1, if that's really who you are, we need you here immediately. Time is critical." "Roger that, Colonel. I'm on my way." Helen Morrison hung up the library phone, walked to her desk, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, carefully wrapped in cloth, was something she hadn't touched in 7 years. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she unwrapped the custom-built rifle that had once made her the most feared sniper in the entire U.S. military. The quiet librarian who had been recommending children's books and helping with homework was about to remind the world that some skills never fade, some training never expires, and some heroes never really retire. They just wait quietly in libraries until the moment they're needed most. The drive from Willowbrook Library to Camp Thunderbolt normally took 15 minutes. Helen Morrison made it in 8, her aging Honda Civic moving through traffic with a precision that would have impressed any tactical driving instructor. She hadn't driven like this in years, but muscle memory kicked in the moment lives were on the line. As she pulled up to the base's main gate, the guards were already expecting her. Word had spread through the chain of command with lightning speed. Phantom 1 was coming. The problem was, nobody quite believed it was real. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos stood at the checkpoint, her expression a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She'd heard the radio chatter, listened to the excited whispers among the staff, but looking at the woman stepping out of the Honda, she couldn't reconcile the image with the legend. Helen Morrison looked exactly like what she was, a 65-year-old librarian. She wore sensible shoes, a cardigan sweater, and carried a worn leather bag that looked like it had seen decades of use. Her graying hair was still pulled back in its usual bun, and her reading glasses hung from their chain around her neck. "Ma'am," Santos said, approaching the vehicle, "I'm going to need to see some identification." Helen handed over her driver's license without argument. "Helen Morrison, 1247 Elm Street, Willowbrook. I'm here about the sniper situation." Santos studied the license, then looked back at Helen. "Ma'am, with all due respect, are you sure you have the right place? This is a military emergency situation." "Sergeant," Helen replied, her voice taking on a subtle authority that made Santos stand straighter, "I believe Colonel Mitchell is expecting me. Call sign Phantom 1. The change in Helen's demeanor was slight but unmistakable. Her posture straightened, her eyes took on a sharper focus, and her voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Santos radioed the command center. "Control, this is Gate 1. I have a civilian female, Helen Morrison, claiming to be you of Phantom 1. The response was immediate. "Send her through. Emergency escort to the Tactical Operations Center." A military police vehicle pulled up within seconds, and Helen was whisked across the base toward the crisis center. As they drove, she observed everything with the trained eye of someone who had spent decades analyzing tactical situations. The base's layout, the positioning of personnel, the obvious tension in every soldier's posture, it all told the story of a military installation under maximum stress. The Tactical Operations Center was buzzing with controlled chaos when Helen walked in. Maps covered every wall, communication equipment hummed with constant chatter, and officers moved with the urgent precision of people trying to save lives against a ticking clock. Every conversation stopped. When she entered the room, Colonel Mitchell turned from a bank of monitors displaying the hostage situation. He was a tall man in his 50s, with the bearing of someone who had seen combat and the gray hair that came with commanding responsibility. His eyes moved from Helen's face to her civilian clothes and back again, clearly struggling to process what he was seeing. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I'm Colonel Mitchell. You're Phantom 1? I was," Helen replied simply. "Retired 7 years ago, but I still remember how to shoot." Captain Brooks stepped forward, his expression openly skeptical. "Ma'am, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but this is a military operation. We have 12 hostages, 3 armed terrorists, and shot distances that require precision most active-duty snipers can't achieve." Helen's response was to open her leather bag and pull out a small notebook, worn smooth from years of use. She flipped through pages covered with calculations, wind readings, and shooting data that spanned decades of operations. "Captain," she said, looking up from the notebook, "what's the longest shot you've ever made?" Brooks straightened. 800 meters, ma'am. During training exercises. The longest confirmed kill in my service record was 1,847 meters in Afghanistan during a sandstorm with a crosswind of 15 knots. She closed the notebook. "I've made shots that the Army still classifies as impossible. The room fell silent. Staff Sergeant Cole, who had been standing near the communications equipment, spoke up. "Ma'am, I've been coming to your library for months. You've been helping me with my research, recommending books on military tactics. You've been studying for your sergeant's exam," Helen replied. "You needed to understand the Battle of Stalingrad for your strategic analysis paper. I recommended Enemy at the Gates because it focuses on the psychological aspects of urban warfare, which is what you were struggling with." Cole's mouth fell open. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," Helen said matter-of-factly. "It's part of the training." Lieutenant Price pulled up a computer screen showing Helen's service record. What she saw made her breath catch. "Ma'am, according to this, you served for 28 years. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Classified operations in..." "Well, they're still classified. The important thing," Helen said, "is that I can make the shots you need." "What's the tactical situation?" Colonel Mitchell moved to a large monitor displaying blueprints of the building where the hostages were held. 3 terrorists, armed with automatic weapons. They've positioned themselves here, here, and here. He pointed to strategic locations throughout the structure. Traditional assault is impossible because they have clear sight lines to all approach routes. Helen studied the layout with the intensity of someone reading a favorite book. Her eyes moved across the blueprint, calculating angles, distances, and possibilities that others might miss. "Wind conditions?" she asked. "Variable, 7 to 12 knots from the southwest. Temperature? 68 degrees, humidity at 40%. Helen was already calculating in her head, her mind processing variables that would affect bullet trajectory over long distances. "I'll need to see the actual building. And I'll need my equipment." "Ma'am," Captain Brooks interrupted. "What equipment?" "We weren't expecting." Helen walked back to her Honda and opened the trunk. Inside, secured in custom-fitted foam, was a rifle case that looked like it had been maintained with military precision. She lifted it out with the reverence of someone handling a sacred object. "This is Whisper," she said, patting the case. "My M24 sniper weapon system. Custom modifications for extended range and precision accuracy. She's been with me for 15 years. The officers gathered around as Helen opened the case. Inside was a rifle that was clearly more than just a weapon. It was a precision instrument that had been cared for and maintained with obsessive attention to detail. "Ma'am," Colonel Mitchell said, his voice now carrying genuine respect. "How soon can you be in position?" Helen was already checking the rifle's mechanisms with movements that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. "Give me 15 minutes to get eyes on the target, and I'll be ready to end this." As she worked, Private Tyler Jackson appeared at her elbow. "Mrs. Morrison, is that really you?" Helen looked up at the young soldier she'd helped find books about. "Military history. Hello, Tyler. Yes, it's me. But you're a librarian." Helen smiled as she continued her equipment check. "Tyler, I've always told you that knowledge is the most powerful weapon. Sometimes that knowledge includes knowing exactly where to place a bullet to save 12 lives." The transformation was remarkable. The quiet librarian who had been recommending romance novels just 2 hours earlier was now handling military-grade equipment with the confidence of a master craftsman. Her movements were precise, economical, and spoke of decades of experience. In situations where a single mistake could cost lives, Colonel Mitchell watched her work with growing amazement. "Phantom 1, we need those hostages out alive." Helen looked up from her rifle, and for the first time, everyone in the room saw not the gentle librarian, but the legendary sniper who had earned a call sign that was whispered about in military circles around the world. "Colonel," she said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had never missed when it mattered, "consider it done." The building where the hostages were held stood like a fortress against the afternoon sky. Helen Morrison crouched behind a concrete barrier 800 meters away, her trained eyes studying every detail of the structure through a pair of military-grade binoculars. What she saw confirmed her worst fears and best hopes simultaneously. The three-story administrative building had been chosen by the terrorists for good reason. It offered multiple escape routes, clear sight lines in all directions, and a design that made traditional assault tactics nearly impossible. But Helen wasn't thinking like a traditional soldier. She was thinking like a predator who had spent decades finding the impossible shot. Colonel Mitchell knelt beside her, his own binoculars trained on the building. "What do you see, Phantom One?" "Three distinct firing positions," Helen replied, her voice calm and analytical. "Terrorist One is on the second floor, northeast corner. He's got a clear view of the main approach and the parking area. Terrorist 2 is on the first floor, southwest corner, covering the rear exit. Terrorist 3 is mobile, moving between the first and second floors. The hostages?" Helen adjusted her binoculars slightly. "Third floor, conference room. I can see movement through the windows. They're positioned away from the exterior walls, which is smart tactical thinking from the terrorists. Makes a traditional sniper approach almost impossible." Captain Brooks, who had been monitoring radio communications, approached their position. "Ma'am, we've got audio from inside. The terrorists are becoming increasingly agitated. They're talking about deadline ultimatums." Helen lowered her binoculars and turned to study the tactical map that Lieutenant Price had spread on the ground. Her finger traced potential shooting positions, calculating angles and distances with the precision of someone who had made these calculations hundreds of times under pressure. "The shot I need isn't to the building," she said finally. "It's through the building." Colonel Mitchell looked confused. "Through the building?" Helen pointed to a water tower positioned 1,200 meters northeast of the target structure. "If I position myself on that tower, I can achieve a shooting angle that penetrates the building's interior at a trajectory that neutralizes the threats without endangering the hostages." "Ma'am," Captain Brooks said, his voice tight with concern, "that's over 1,200 meters. Through multiple interior walls, the variables alone." "Captain," Helen interrupted, her voice taking on the authority of someone who had commanded respect in the world's most dangerous places, "I've made shots through sandstorms that would ground aircraft. I've compensated for wind shear that would throw off most people's calculations by 50 meters. This shot is difficult, but it's not impossible." She opened her worn notebook and began making calculations. Wind speed, humidity, temperature, bullet drop over distance, wall penetration coefficients, and a dozen other variables that would affect the trajectory of a precision shot over extraordinary distance. "Staff." Sergeant Cole watched her work with growing amazement. "Ma'am, how do you calculate all those variables so quickly?" Helen looked up from her notebook. 28 years of practice, Sergeant. When you've made shots that other people call impossible, you learn to see possibilities where others see problems." The radio crackled with an urgent transmission. "Command, this is Overwatch. We've got movement inside the building. It looks like they're preparing to move the hostages." Colonel Mitchell grabbed the radio. "How long do we have?" "Unknown, sir. But they're getting organized. If they move those hostages to a secondary location, we lose our tactical advantage." Helen was already packing her equipment. "Colonel, I need to get to that water tower immediately. And I need a spotter who can handle extended range calculations." "I'll go with you," offered Lieutenant Price. "No," Helen said firmly. "I need someone with combat experience. Someone who's been under fire and won't freeze when the pressure hits." Sergeant First Class Santos stepped forward. "Ma'am, I've got 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've spotted for sniper teams before." Helen studied Santos for a moment, evaluating her with the same intensity she'd used to assess the tactical situation. "What's the longest shot you've spotted for?" 900 meters, ma'am. Urban environment, multiple wind variables." "Good enough." Helen shouldered her rifle case. We leave in 2 minutes." As they prepared to move, Private Jackson approached Helen with obvious concern. "Mrs. Morrison, this is really dangerous. Are you sure you want to do this?" Helen paused in her preparations. For a moment, the legendary sniper facade slipped, and Tyler saw the gentle librarian who had helped him find books about military history. "Tyler, do you remember the book I recommended last month? The Things They Carried?" "Yes, ma'am. You said it would help me understand what it really means to be a soldier. Do you remember what the author said about courage? That it's not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear?" Helen shouldered her equipment bag. "I'm terrified, Tyler, but there are 12 people in that building who are counting on someone to make an impossible shot. And I'm the only person here who's ever made impossible shots." The drive to the water tower took 8 minutes through back roads that avoided the main crisis area. Helen sat in the passenger seat of the military vehicle, her eyes closed, running through the shot sequence in her mind. She visualized the trajectory, the wind compensation, the precise moment when she would need to squeeze the trigger. Santos drove with the focused intensity of someone who understood that timing was everything. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Why did you really retire?" "Someone with your skills, your record. The military would have kept you as long as you wanted to serve." Helen was quiet for a long moment. "Maria, I spent 28 years taking lives to save lives. I was good at it, better than anyone had a right to be. But after a while, you start to wonder if there's more to life than being the person who makes the impossible shot. And the library? The library was supposed to be my peace, helping people find knowledge instead of finding targets, building things up instead of taking them down." She opened her eyes and looked at Santos. "But peace is a luxury you can only afford when other people are willing to do the hard things." They reached the water tower as the sun was beginning to set. The structure rose 200 feet into the air, offering a clear view of the crisis area and the shooting angle Helen needed. But it also meant climbing 200 feet of metal ladder while carrying precision equipment. "Ma'am," Santos said, looking up at the tower, "that's a long climb for anyone." Helen was already strapping her equipment securely to her back. "Sergeant, I've climbed mountain faces in Afghanistan while carrying twice this much gear. This is just a ladder." The climb took 12 minutes. Helen moved with steady precision, her breathing controlled and even despite the physical demands. When they reached the platform at the top, she immediately began setting up her shooting position, while Santos established her spotting equipment. From 200 feet up, the entire crisis area was visible. The building where the hostages were held looked small and vulnerable, but Helen knew that appearances were deceiving. The shot she needed to make would require compensating for variables that most snipers never encountered. Range to target: 1,247 meters, Santos reported. Reading from her spotting scope. Helen adjusted her rifle's scope, her movements precise and economical. Wind, variable, 8 to 14 knots from the southwest. Gusting, temperature dropping, humidity rising. Helen made minute adjustments to her scope. "This shot is going to be interesting." The radio crackled with an urgent transmission. "Overwatch to command. The terrorists are moving the hostages. They're heading toward the stairwell. If they reach the ground floor, we lose our tactical advantage." Helen settled into her shooting position, her body assuming the stance that had become second nature over decades of practice. Through her scope, she could see the interior of the building, the movement of figures, the precise moment when everything would come together. "Colonel," she spoke into her radio, "I have eyes on target. 3 terrorists, 12 hostages. They're moving toward the stairwell. Phantom 1, are you in position?" Helen's finger moved to the trigger, and for the first time in 7 years, she felt the familiar calm that came with holding someone's life in the balance. The gentle librarian who had been recommending children's books that morning was gone. replaced by the legendary sniper who had earned a reputation for making impossible shots. "Colonel," she said, her voice steady as stone, "I'm ready to end this." The world narrowed to a single point of focus. Helen Morrison lay prone on the water tower platform, her body perfectly aligned with the rifle that had been her constant companion for 15 years. Through the scope, she could see the interior of the building with crystal clarity, every movement, every shadow, every detail that would determine whether 12 people lived or died. "Wind holding steady at 10 knots, Santos reported, her voice barely above a whisper. "Temperature 64 degrees and dropping." Helen's breathing slowed to the rhythm she had perfected over thousands of hours of training. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth. Her heart rate dropped to 50 beats per minute, the physiological state that allowed for precision beyond normal human capability. Through the scope, she watched the terrorists herding the hostages toward the stairwell. Terrorist 1 was in. The lead, his AK-47 trained on the group of frightened civilians. Terrorist 2 flanked the group from the left side, while Terrorist 3 brought up the rear. The formation was tactically sound, making a traditional rescue nearly impossible, but Helen wasn't planning a traditional rescue. "Command, this is Phantom 1, she spoke into her radio, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had made life-and-death decisions in the world's most dangerous places. "I have a clear shot sequence. 3 targets, 1,200-meter range, multiple wall penetration required." Colonel Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio. "Phantom 1, confirm you can neutralize all 3 targets without endangering the hostages." Helen adjusted her scope by a fraction of a degree, compensating for the wind that was picking up as the sun set. "Confirmed. I need 60 seconds of clear observation, then 30 seconds of absolute radio silence." "You have it. All units, hold position and maintain radio silence on my mark." Helen's finger moved to the trigger guard, not yet touching the trigger itself. Through the scope, she could see the faces of the hostages' men and women who had come to work that morning, never imagining they would be fighting for their lives by evening. A woman in her 30s who reminded Helen of her own daughter. An older man who looked like he should be playing with grandchildren instead of staring down the barrel of a terrorist's weapon. "Range confirmed at 1,247 meters, Santos whispered, making final adjustments to her spotting scope. "Target acquired." Helen's crosshairs settled on Terrorist 1, but she wasn't planning to shoot him first. The shot sequence she had calculated required a different approach, one that would use the laws of physics and her intimate knowledge of building construction to achieve what others would consider impossible. The building's interior wall structure was standard government construction, drywall over steel studs with load-bearing concrete pillars at regular intervals. Helen had memorized the blueprints, calculating the exact trajectory needed to penetrate the walls at an angle that would allow her bullet to travel through the building's interior space. 30 seconds, Colonel Mitchell announced. Helen's breathing became even more controlled. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips, could sense the subtle vibration of the water tower in the evening breeze. Every variable that could affect the shot was cataloged in her mind, compensated for, and integrated into the firing solution. Through the scope, she watched Terrorist 3 move into position. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the precise instant when all 3 targets would align with the trajectory she had calculated. Radio silence mark. Colonel Mitchell's voice was the last sound on the frequency. Helen's finger moved to the trigger. The weight of it was familiar, comforting even. She had pulled this same trigger in Afghanistan mountains, in Iraqi deserts, in classified locations that would never appear on any map. But this shot was different. This shot was about saving lives, not taking them. Her crosshairs settled on a point that seemed to be empty space, a calculation based on where Terrorist 3 would be when the bullet arrived after traveling 1,247 meters through multiple barriers. To anyone watching, it would look like she was aiming at nothing. But Helen wasn't seeing the present. She was seeing 3 seconds into the future, when all the variables would converge into a single moment of perfect precision. The trigger broke cleanly. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar authority, and the .308 Winchester round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, beginning its journey toward a target that existed only in Helen's calculations. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's impact sequence unfold exactly as she had predicted. The round penetrated the building's exterior wall, traveled through the interior space, and struck Terrorist 3 in the center of mass. The impact spun him around, his weapon flying from his hands as he collapsed, but Helen was already working the bolt action, chambering the second round. The shot sequence wasn't complete. Terrorist 2, startled by the sound of his partner's collapse, turned toward the source of the noise. In that moment of distraction, he exposed himself to Helen's second calculated trajectory. The second shot was even more complex, a ricochet shot that used the building's interior concrete pillar as a deflection point. The bullet struck the pillar at precisely the angle Helen had calculated, deflecting toward Terrorist 2's position. The physics worked exactly as she had predicted. The deflected bullet caught Terrorist 2 in the shoulder, spinning him around, and sending his weapon clattering across the floor. Terrorist 1, the leader, realized what was happening and began to raise his weapon toward the hostages. This was the moment Helen had been most concerned about, the split second when desperation might lead to a massacre. Her third shot was the most difficult of all. A direct shot through multiple interior walls, compensating for the structural barriers that would slow and deflect the bullet. She had only one chance to stop him before he could harm the hostages. Helen's breathing stopped entirely. Her fingers squeezed the trigger with the precision of someone who had never missed when it mattered most. The third bullet traveled its complex path through the building's interior, maintaining enough velocity and accuracy to strike Terrorist 1 in the upper chest. The impact drove him backward, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the ceiling as he fell. "Shots fired," Helen reported into her radio, her voice as calm as if she had just recommended a book to a library patron. 3 targets neutralized. Hostages secure. The radio exploded with activity. "Assault teams go. Medical teams stand by. All units, the building is secure." Through her scope, Helen watched as the hostages, stunned but alive, began to realize they were safe. The woman who reminded her of her daughter was crying with relief. The older man was helping others to their feet, his face filled with the wonder of someone who had been given an unexpected gift of continued life. Santos lowered her spotting scope and stared at Helen with something approaching awe. "Ma'am, I've never seen anything like that." 3 shots, 3 different trajectories, all within 15 seconds. Helen was already beginning to pack her equipment, her movements efficient and practiced. "Sergeant, that's what 28 years of training looks like when it matters." "Ma'am, how did you know the ricochet shot would work?" Helen paused in her packing. "Physics, Sergeant. Bullets follow predictable paths when you understand the variables. I spent 15 years learning to make bullets do impossible things." As they prepared to climb down from the water tower, Colonel Mitchell's voice came through the radio. "Phantom 1, this is command. Outstanding work. All hostages secure. All threats neutralized. You just saved 12 lives." Helen shouldered her rifle case and looked out over the base, where emergency vehicles were converging on the now secure building. In a few minutes, she would be back to being a librarian. But for this moment, she was still Phantom 1, the legendary sniper who had just reminded the world that some skills transcend age, some training never expires, and some heroes never really retire. "Colonel," she replied, beginning her descent down the ladder, just doing what needed to be done. But even as she spoke, Helen knew that this was just the beginning. The impossible shots she had just made would soon be analyzed, questioned, and investigated by people who couldn't believe what they had witnessed. The quiet librarian, who had spent her morning organizing books, was about to become the most famous sniper in the world. The emergency vehicles had barely stopped moving when Private Tyler Jackson's phone came out. He had been recording everything from the moment Helen Morrison arrived at the base, but what he captured in the aftermath of the rescue would change everything. The footage showed Helen climbing down from the water tower with the same calm precision she had used to make 3 impossible shots. Her rifle case was slung over her shoulder, her gray hair had come loose from its bun, and she moved with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just completed a routine task. "Mrs. Morrison," Tyler called out as she reached the ground. "How does it feel to have just saved 12 lives?" Helen paused, looking directly into the camera with the same gentle expression she wore when helping teenagers find books for their school reports. "Tyler, I did what anyone with my training would have done. I'm just glad everyone is safe. But ma'am, those shots were impossible. The distance, the angles, the ricochet. Nothing's impossible if you understand the physics involved," Helen replied, adjusting her reading glasses. "Bullets follow predictable paths when you account for all the variables." Tyler's video would be uploaded to social media within the hour, but the military's investigation was already beginning. Colonel Mitchell had ordered a complete forensic analysis of the shooting sequence, not because he doubted Helen's abilities, but because he needed to understand exactly how she had accomplished what she had done. Captain Brooks stood in the building where the hostages had been held, examining the bullet impacts with a team of military forensic specialists. What they found defied everything they understood about long-range precision shooting. "The entry points are exactly where she said they would be," reported Sergeant Williams, the base's chief ballistics expert. "But the TRAJEC Captain, I've run these calculations 6 times. The shots she made shouldn't have been possible." Brooks examined the ricochet point where Helen's second bullet had deflected off the concrete pillar. The angle was so precise that it seemed calculated rather than lucky. "Williams, what's your assessment?" "Sir, in my professional opinion, these shots represent a level of marksmanship that goes beyond anything in our current training manuals." The ricochet shot alone required her to calculate not just the primary trajectory, but the deflection angle and the secondary trajectory. Most snipers couldn't make that shot with unlimited time and controlled conditions. And she made it under pressure, in fading light, with a crosswind. "Yes, sir." And the third shot, the direct penetration through multiple interior walls, required her to compensate for velocity loss and deflection through each barrier. "I've never seen anything like it." Meanwhile, in the base medical facility, the rescued hostages were being treated for shock and minor injuries. Dr. Sarah Chun, the base physician, was amazed by what she was hearing from the people Helen had saved. "The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds, reported James Peterson, a civilian contractor who had been in the conference room. "We heard the first shot, and one of the terrorists just fell. Then the second shot, and another one went down. By the third shot, it was over." "Did you see where the shots came from?" Dr. Chun asked. "That's the thing, Doc. We were on the 3rd floor, and those shots came from impossible angles. Like someone was shooting from multiple positions simultaneously." Maria Rodriguez, a military observer from the Defense Intelligence Agency, had been one of the hostages. Her testimony would prove crucial in the investigation that was already being planned. "Doctor, I've been briefed on sniper capabilities as part of my intelligence training. What happened in that building wasn't just exceptional marksmanship, it was artistry." Back at the Tactical Operations Center, Helen was sitting quietly in a corner, filling out incident reports with the same methodical care she used to catalog library books. Her transformation back to civilian demeanor was complete, but the officers around her were struggling to reconcile the gentle librarian with the legendary sniper who had just saved 12 lives. Staff Sergeant Cole approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am, I've been thinking about our conversations at the library. All those books you recommended about military history, the tactics manuals you helped me find. You needed to understand combined arms operations for your promotion exam," Helen said without looking up from her paperwork. "I recommended the Face of Battle because it explains how individual soldiers function within larger tactical frameworks. But you weren't just helping me study. You were evaluating me." Helen looked up from her reports. "Nathan, I was doing what librarians do. I was helping you find the information you needed. The fact that I understood the information doesn't change the service I was providing." Sergeant First Class Santos, who had spotted for Helen during the rescue, joined the conversation. "Ma'am, can I ask you something? During the climb up the water tower, you didn't seem winded at all. Most people your age would have been exhausted. Maria, I may be 65, but I've maintained my physical conditioning. You don't lose 28 years of training just because you retire. But why? Why stay in that kind of shape if you weren't planning to use those skills?" Helen was quiet for a long moment, because you never know when someone might need help. And when that moment comes, you want to be ready. Colonel Mitchell approached their group, his expression serious. "Mrs. Morrison, I've just received a call from the Pentagon. They want a full debrief on today's operation." "Of course," Helen replied, continuing to fill out her paperwork. "I'll be happy to provide whatever information they need." "Ma'am, they want you in Washington tomorrow." Helen's pen stopped moving. "Colonel, I'm not active duty. I'm a civilian who helped in an emergency situation. Mrs. Morrison, what you did today is already being called the most remarkable display of marksmanship in modern military history. The shots you made are being analyzed by every sniper school in the country. They need to understand not just how you did it, but how we can teach others to do it." Private Jackson, who had been listening to the conversation, spoke up. "Ma'am, the video I took is already going viral. People are calling you a hero." Helen looked at the young soldier with something approaching sadness. "Tyler, I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who's in the right place at the right time with the right skills. But ma'am, you saved 12 lives with shots that experts are saying were impossible. Nothing's impossible if you've had the right training and enough practice." Helen stood up, gathering her completed paperwork. "Colonel, I'll cooperate with whatever investigation is necessary, but I'd like to go home now. I have a library to run, and tomorrow is story time for the kindergarten class." The juxtaposition was jarring. The woman who had just made 3 impossible shots to save 12 lives was worried about reading picture books to 5-year-olds. But that was exactly what made Helen Morrison extraordinary. She was a legend who had chosen to live an ordinary life, using her extraordinary skills only when absolutely necessary. As she walked toward her Honda Civic, Colonel Mitchell called after her, "Mrs. Morrison, one more question. How long have you been ready for something like this?" Helen paused at her car door. "Colonel, I've been ready every day for 7 years. I hoped I'd never need to be, but I was always ready." "Why?" "Because that's what we do. We serve. Whether we're wearing a uniform or organizing books, we serve. Today, service looked like making 3 impossible shots. Tomorrow, it'll look like helping a child find a book about dinosaurs." As Helen drove away from Camp Thunderbolt, she had no idea that her quiet life as a librarian was about to end forever. The Pentagon investigation that Colonel Mitchell had mentioned was already being organized, and the people running it had very specific ideas about what should happen to civilians who possessed Helen Morrison's unique combination of skills. By morning, the woman who had spent 7 years in peaceful anonymity would be the most famous sniper in the world. And not everyone was going to be happy about what she had done. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Helen Morrison was reshelving returned books at the Willowbrook Community Library when the black SUVs pulled into the parking lot. It was 9:30 a.m., exactly 18 hours after she had made 3 impossible shots to save 12 lives, and her quiet life as a librarian was about to end forever. Major David Kim stepped out of the lead vehicle, his dress uniform crisp despite the early hour. Behind him came Dr. Michael Cooper, a military psychologist, and Captain Jennifer Reed, a Pentagon investigator specializing in classified operations. They moved with the purposeful stride of people who had important business to conduct. Helen watched them approach through the library's front windows, her trained eye automatically assessing their formation, their alertness levels, and their obvious military bearing. She had been expecting this visit since Colonel Mitchell's phone call the night before, but that didn't make it any less unsettling. "Mrs. Morrison?" Major Kim approached the circulation desk where Helen was working. "I'm Major Kim from the Department of Defense. We need to speak with you about yesterday's incident." Helen looked up from her computer, her reading glasses perched on her nose, every inch the helpful librarian. "Of course, Major, though I should mention that the library doesn't open for another 30 minutes. I'm here early to prepare for today's kindergarten story time." The juxtaposition was deliberate. Helen knew that emphasizing her civilian role would make these military investigators uncomfortable, and discomfort often led to mistakes and questioning. Dr. Cooper stepped forward, his expression professionally neutral. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Dr. Cooper, a military psychologist. We're here to conduct a psychological evaluation related to yesterday's events." "Am I under arrest?" Helen asked calmly. "No, ma'am. But we need to understand the psychological profile of someone capable of making the shots you made yesterday." Helen saved her work on the computer and gestured toward the library's small conference room. "Gentlemen, let's sit down. But I should warn you, I have story time at 10 o'clock, and I don't cancel on 5-year-olds. As they settled around the conference table, Major Kim opened a thick folder. "Mrs. Morrison, we've been reviewing your service record. According to our files, you retired 7 years ago with full honors after 28 years of service." "That's correct. Your record shows 1,847 confirmed kills, multiple distinguished service medals, and completion of classified operations that are still redacted." Kim looked up from the file. "But according to our psychological profiles, snipers with your kill count typically suffer from PTSD, depression, or other combat-related psychological conditions." Helen's expression didn't change. "Major, are you asking me about my mental health?" Dr. Cooper leaned forward. "Mrs. Morrison, we're trying to understand how someone with your combat history transitions to civilian life so successfully. Most snipers with your experience struggle with reintegration." "Doctor, I read stories to children and helped teenagers find books for their school reports. If that's not successful reintegration, I don't know what is." Captain Reed, who had been silent until now, opened her own folder. "Ma'am, we've been analyzing the ballistics from yesterday's operation. The shots you made required calculations that go beyond standard sniper training. Captain, I had good teachers. Ma'am, we've spoken with your former instructors. They describe your abilities as supernatural and beyond human capability. How do you respond to that?" Helen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful street where parents were dropping children off at the elementary school across the road. "Captain, I respond by pointing out that I'm very human. I just had 28 years to get very good at something I was naturally suited for." Major Kim pulled out a tablet and began playing Tyler Jackson's video from the previous day. "Mrs. Morrison, this footage has been viewed over 2 million times in the past 18 hours. Military experts around the world are analyzing your performance. I don't control what people do with their phones, Major." "Ma'am, the shots you made are being called impossible by leading ballistics experts. How do you explain that?" Helen turned back to face the three investigators. Major, I explain it by pointing out that your experts are wrong. The shots weren't impossible, they were just very difficult. Dr. Cooper made notes on his tablet. Mrs. Morrison, during your military service, did you ever experience hallucinations, time distortion, or other unusual psychological phenomena during high-stress situations? Doctor, are you asking if I have supernatural powers? I'm asking if you've ever experienced psychological states that enhanced your performance beyond normal human parameters. Helen sat back down, her patience clearly wearing thin. Gentlemen, I think we need to clarify something. I'm a retired soldier who helped in an emergency situation. I used skills that I learned during my military service to save lives. There's nothing supernatural, impossible, or psychologically abnormal about that. Captain Reed leaned forward. Ma'am, we've run computer simulations of your shots using the most advanced ballistics software available. The computer models show a success probability of less than 0.3% for each shot individually. Captain, computers don't account for experience, intuition, or the kind of muscle memory that comes from making thousands of shots under combat conditions. Ma'am, even accounting for experience, the probability of making all 3 shots successfully is mathematically negligible. Helen smiled for the first time during the interview. Captain, mathematics didn't make those shots. I did. Major Kim closed his folder. Mrs. Morrison, we need you to come to Washington for a comprehensive evaluation. We need to understand how you do what you do, and we need to determine if those capabilities can be taught to others. Major, I'm not interested in teaching anyone to kill more effectively. Ma'am, we're not talking about killing. We're talking about saving lives. If we can understand your capabilities, we can train other snipers to perform similar rescue operations. Helen stood up again, checking her watch. Major, it's 9:55. I have 15 5-year-olds arriving in 5 minutes, who are expecting me to read them a story about a brave little rabbit who saves his family from danger. Mrs. Morrison, this is a matter of national security importance. Major, so is teaching children that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Helen walked toward the door. If you want to continue this conversation, you'll need to make an appointment. Right now I have a story to tell. As she left the conference room, Dr. Cooper turned to Major Kim. What's your assessment? She's hiding something. No one transitions from that level of combat effectiveness to civilian life without psychological consequences. Captain Reed looked up from her tablet. Or maybe she's exactly what she appears to be, a highly skilled professional who's chosen to use her abilities for something other than warfare. Reed, that's not how psychology works. People don't just turn off 28 years of conditioning. Maybe she didn't turn it off. Maybe she redirected it. Through the conference room window, they could see Helen settling into the children's section of the library, surrounded by 15 kindergartners who were looking up at her. With the rapt attention that only children can give to a good storyteller, she opened a picture book and began reading in the same calm, controlled voice she had used to coordinate the rescue operation the day before. Once upon a time, there was a little rabbit who lived in a peaceful meadow with his family. Major Kim watched through the window, his expression troubled. This doesn't make sense. Someone with her psychological profile shouldn't be able to function normally in civilian situations. Unless, Dr. Cooper said thoughtfully, her definition of normal is different from ours. As they packed up their files, none of the 3 investigators realized that their evaluation of Helen Morrison had revealed more about their own limitations than about her capabilities. They were trying to understand someone who had successfully integrated 2 completely different aspects of human nature, the warrior and the nurturer, into a single, functioning personality. But their investigation was just beginning. By the time they returned to Washington, orders would be waiting that would change everything Helen Morrison thought she knew about her. Quiet retirement, The Pentagon had decided that someone with her unique capabilities was too valuable to remain a civilian, and they had ways of making sure she cooperated, whether she wanted to or not. 3 days after the Pentagon investigators left Willowbrook, Helen Morrison received a phone call that changed everything. She was cataloging new fiction arrivals when her personal cell phone rang, displaying a number she hadn't seen in 7 years but would never forget. "Hello, Ghost," said the voice on the other end. General Patricia Stone, her former commanding officer and one of the few people who knew the full extent of Helen's classified operations. "General," Helen replied, stepping away from the circulation desk, "I was wondering when you'd call. We need to talk. In person. Tonight." Helen looked around the quiet library where Mrs. Patterson was browsing the romance section and teenage. Tommy Walsh was pretending to study while actually reading comic books. "General, I'm not active duty anymore. I'm a librarian." "Helen, they're going to try to destroy you. The psychological evaluation you underwent 3 days ago, it was just the beginning. They're building a case to have you declared mentally unfit for civilian life." Helen felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about people who can't understand how someone with your capabilities chooses to read stories to children instead of killing for the government. They think you're either lying about your psychological state or you're a security risk." "General, I saved 12 lives. How does that make me a security risk?" "Because you did it without authorization, without oversight, and with capabilities that officially don't exist." General Stone's voice was grim. "Helen, there are classified aspects of your service record that even I don't have access to. Operations so deep that the people who authorize them are no longer in government." Helen walked to the library's back office, closing the door behind her. "General, what are you trying to tell me?" "I'm telling you that Major Kim and his team weren't just evaluating you. They were building a psychological profile to justify bringing you back into active service whether you want to come or not. They can't do that. I'm a civilian." "Helen, your discharge papers have a clause that allows for involuntary reactivation in cases of national security necessity. It's buried in the fine print, but it's there." Helen sat down heavily in her desk chair. "General, I just want to live quietly. I don't want to go back to that life." "I know you don't, but they're not going to give you a choice. Unless..." "Unless what?" "Unless we give them a reason to leave you alone." "Helen, I'm going to declassify portions of your service record. Operations that have been classified for 15 years. The public needs to know who you really are." Helen's blood went cold. "General, you can't do that. Those operations are the reason you're the most decorated sniper in U.S. military history. The reason you have capabilities that go beyond anything in the current training manuals. The reason you were able to make 3 impossible shots to save 12 lives. General, please. I don't want that attention." "Helen, you already have the attention. That video of your rescue has been viewed by over 10 million people. Military analysts around the world are studying your performance. You can't go back to anonymity." General Stone's voice softened, "But you can control the narrative. If I declassify your record, people will understand that you're not just a skilled marksman. You're a national treasure who chose to serve her community instead of seeking glory." Helen stared out the window at the peaceful street where children were walking home from school. "What operations are you talking about?" "Operation Silent Thunder. The mission where you eliminated 12 enemy snipers in a single day to protect a convoy of wounded soldiers. Operation Ghostwalker. The classified mission where you spent 6 months behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence and eliminating high-value targets. General, Operation Phantom Strike. The mission where you made a 2,347-meter shot to eliminate a terrorist leader who was about to execute American hostages. A shot that was considered impossible until you made it." Helen closed her eyes. General, those missions were classified for a reason. They were classified because they were so far beyond normal operational parameters that the Pentagon didn't want our enemies to know what we were capable of. But Helen, keeping them classified is now working against you. How? Because without understanding your true capabilities, investigators are assuming you're either lying about your psychological state or you're some kind of security risk. They don't understand that you're not just a sniper, you're the sniper. The one they call when impossible shots need to be made. Helen stood up and walked to her office window. Outside, she could see Tommy Walsh walking home from the library, a stack of books under his arm. She had helped him find those books, had encouraged his interest in science fiction, had watched him grow from a struggling reader into someone who loved literature. General, if you declassify those operations, my life here is over. Helen, your life there is already over. The question is whether you control what comes next or whether you let other people control it for you. Helen was quiet for a long moment. What would declassification mean? It means the world would know that the gentle librarian who reads stories to children is also the most skilled sniper in modern military history. It means people would understand that when you made those 3 shots to save 12 lives, you weren't getting lucky, you were doing what you've always done, which is making impossible shots to save American lives. Helen opened her desk drawer and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed her in military fatigues, standing beside a helicopter in an Afghan desert, her rifle slung over her shoulder. She looked younger, harder, more dangerous. But her eyes held the same calm determination that had allowed her to save 12 hostages 3 days earlier. General, there's something else. Something that's not in my official record. What are you talking about? Operation Lazarus. The mission that doesn't exist in any database. General Stone was quiet for a long moment. Helen, Lazarus is so classified that I'm not even sure it happened. It happened, and it's the reason I retired. What are you telling me? Helen looked at the photograph again, remembering the weight of the rifle, the calculations, the impossible shot that had saved hundreds of lives and ended her military career. General, I'm telling you that if you declassify my record, you need to declassify all of it, including the mission that made me realize I was too good at killing people. Helen, I made a shot that was physically impossible. A shot that saved 347 American soldiers who were about to be overrun by enemy forces. A shot that was so far beyond normal human capability that the Pentagon buried it in classification so deep that most people don't even know it exists. General. Stone's voice was barely a whisper. What kind of shot? The kind that makes you realize you've become something more than human, and something less than human at the same time. Helen closed her eyes, remembering the moment that had changed everything. General, I retired because I was afraid of what I had become. I became a librarian because I wanted to remember what it felt like to help people build things up instead of tearing them down. And now I'm realizing that some skills can't be retired. Some capabilities can't be ignored. Some people are meant to make impossible shots when impossible shots need to be made. Helen opened her eyes and looked out at the peaceful street where she had spent 7 years learning to be human again. General, declassify everything. Let the world know who I really am. Helen, are you sure? I'm sure. Because if I don't control this narrative, someone else will. And I'd rather be known as the librarian who used to be a legendary sniper than the security risk who's pretending to be a librarian. General Stone was quiet for a moment. Helen, once I do this, there's no going back. General, there was no going back the moment I made those 3 shots. I just didn't realize it yet. As Helen hung up the phone, she looked around her small office one last time. Tomorrow, everything would change. The quiet life she had built would be gone, replaced by something she couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, She was still just a librarian who had to finish cataloging the new fiction arrivals before going home. To her quiet house and her peaceful garden. Tomorrow, the world would learn about Operation Lazarus, and everything would change forever. The declassified documents hit the internet at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. By 6:30, every major news network in the world was scrambling to verify what appeared to be the most extraordinary military service record in modern history. By 7 o'clock, Helen Morrison's phone was ringing nonstop, and news vans were pulling into the Willowbrook Community Library parking lot. Helen sat at her kitchen table, drinking coffee and reading the headlines on her tablet. Local librarian revealed as legendary military sniper. The ghost who reads to children. Phantom 1, the most dangerous woman in America, works at your local library. The classified documents that General Stone had released painted a picture of a soldier whose capabilities went far beyond anything the public had ever imagined. Operation Silent Thunder, where Helen had eliminated 12 enemy snipers in a single day. Operation Ghostwalker, where she had spent 6 months behind enemy lines, moving like a phantom through hostile territory. Operation Phantom Strike, where she had made a 2,347-meter shot to save American hostages, but it was Operation Lazarus that captured the world's attention. The classified report was clinical in its language, but the implications were staggering. Helen Morrison, call sign Phantom 1, had made a 3,127-meter shot, nearly 2 miles, to eliminate a terrorist leader who was coordinating an attack on a forward operating base containing 347 American soldiers. The shot was made at dawn through fog with a crosswind of 23 knots, across terrain that included 3 ridgelines and a valley. Military experts around the world were calling it impossible. The longest confirmed sniper kill in military history was 3,540 meters, made by a Canadian sniper using specialized equipment under ideal conditions. Helen had made a 3,127-meter shot under combat conditions that would have challenged the most advanced computer-guided systems. But what made Operation Lazarus truly extraordinary wasn't just the distance. It was the fact that Helen had calculated the shot in her head, compensating for atmospheric conditions, wind patterns, and terrain obstacles that would have required a team of specialists in computer modeling to analyze. Helen's phone buzzed with a text from Tyler Jackson. Mrs. Morrison, are you seeing the news? They're saying you're some kind of superhuman sniper. She typed back, Tyler, I'm exactly who I've always been. I just used to have a different job. At Camp Thunderbolt, Colonel Mitchell was fielding calls from Pentagon officials who were demanding explanations for how they had missed the fact that a legendary sniper was living 12 miles from their base. The same officials who had been preparing to declare Helen mentally unfit were now scrambling to understand how they had so completely misunderstood her capabilities. Major Kim stood in the briefing room, staring at a wall-mounted screen displaying Helen's declassified service record. Sir, how did we miss this? Her psychological evaluation showed no signs of the kind of trauma typically associated with this level of combat experience. Colonel Mitchell looked up from his phone. Major, maybe that's because she doesn't have trauma. Maybe she has something else entirely. What do you mean, sir? I mean, maybe she's exactly what she appears to be, someone who's completely at peace with who she is and what she's done. Captain Reed entered the briefing room carrying a tablet loaded with news coverage. Sir, you need to see this. CNN is running a story about her rescue operation. They're calling it the impossible triple shot, and they've got ballistics experts analyzing the physics. On the screen, Dr. James Patterson, a ballistics expert from MIT, was explaining Helen's shots to a fascinated news anchor. What Mrs. Morrison accomplished defies everything we understand about long-range precision shooting. The ricochet shot alone required her to calculate not just the primary trajectory, but the deflection angle, the velocity loss from the ricochet, and the secondary trajectory. It's like solving a complex physics equation in your head while someone is shooting at you. Dr. Patterson, is it possible that Mrs. Morrison got lucky? Luck doesn't make 3 consecutive shots like that. What we're looking at is a level of skill that goes beyond training. It's almost like she has an intuitive understanding of physics that allows her to see trajectories that other people can't calculate. Meanwhile, at the Willowbrook Community Library, Helen was trying to conduct normal library business while reporters crowded around the building. She had agreed to speak with one journalist, Sarah Chun from the Washington Post, but only on the condition that the interview take place in the children's section during story time. "Mrs. Morrison," Sarah Chun said, her recorder sitting on the small table surrounded by picture books, "the world is calling you a legend. How do you respond to that?" Helen looked up from the book she was preparing to read to the 15 kindergartners who had arrived for their usual story time, apparently oblivious to the media circus outside. "Miss Chun, I respond by pointing out that legends are stories people tell about heroes they've never met. I'm not a legend. I'm a person who had a job, did it well, and then chose a different job. But the operations you completed, Operation Lazarus alone, was a long time ago." Helen opened the picture book she had selected for the children. "Today, I'm reading The Brave Little Mouse to these children. That's what matters to me now. Mrs. Morrison, military experts are saying your capabilities are beyond human limitations. How do you explain that?" Helen looked at the children gathering around her, their faces bright with anticipation for the story. "Miss Chun, I explain it by saying that humans are capable of extraordinary things when they have the right training, the right motivation, and the right purpose. And your purpose now, my purpose now, is to help these children understand that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that the most important victories are the ones that save lives rather than take them." Little Emma Rodriguez, whose mother worked at Camp Thunderbolt, raised her hand. "Mrs. Morrison, my mommy says you're a superhero." Helen smiled with the same gentle expression she had worn for 7 years of story times. "Emma, I'm not a superhero. I'm just someone who was very good at a job I used to have. Now I have a different job and I'm very good at this one too." "What's your job now?" "My job now is to help you and your friends find the books you need, and to make sure you understand that you can be anything you want to be when you grow up." Tommy Walsh, now 16 and one of Helen's regular library visitors, had been watching the interview from the young adult section. He approached the group hesitantly. "Mrs. Morrison, why didn't you ever tell us who you were?" Helen looked at the teenager she had watched grow from a struggling reader into someone who loved literature. "Tommy, I did tell you who I was. I told you every day for 3 years. I'm a librarian who helps people find what they need. But you were also, I was also a soldier who did what needed to be done. Now I'm a librarian who does what needs to be done. The job changed, but the person didn't." Sarah Chun leaned forward. "Mrs. Morrison, one final question. Are you planning to return to military service?" Helen looked around the library that had been her sanctuary for 7 years. At the children waiting for their story, at the teenagers browsing the graphic novel section, at the adults quietly reading newspapers. This was her world now, and she wasn't ready to give it up. "Miss Chun, I plan to read a story about a brave little mouse who saves his family from danger. After that, I plan to help Mrs. Patterson find a good romance novel and assist Tommy with his research on quantum physics. That's what I do now. And if the military tries to force you back into service..." Helen opened the picture book and looked at the first page. "Then I'll remind them that I spent 28 years serving my country, and I'm still serving my country. I'm just doing it differently now." As she began reading to the children, Helen had no idea that at that very moment, Pentagon officials were drafting orders that would force her to make a choice between her peaceful life and her duty to country. The woman who had spent 7 years learning to be human again was about to discover that some skills are too valuable to be allowed to retire. The storm was coming, and Helen Morrison was going to have to decide whether to weather it as a librarian or face it as Phantom One. The official letter arrived at Helen's house at 7 a.m. on a Friday morning, delivered by a military courier who refused to meet her eyes. Helen signed for the certified document, knowing before she opened it that her quiet life in Willowbrook was about to end. Official notice of involuntary reactivation, the header read in bold military font. By order of the Secretary of Defense, Helen Morrison is hereby recalled to active duty, effective immediately. Failure to report for duty within 72 hours will result in charges of desertion and violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Helen sat at her kitchen table, reading the document twice before reaching for her phone. She dialed General Stone's number, her hand surprisingly steady despite the magnitude of what she was facing. "I was expecting your call," General Stone said before Helen could speak. "They moved faster than I anticipated." "General, can they do this? Can they force me back into active duty after 7 years of civilian life?" "Helen, the reactivation clause in your discharge papers is real, but it's also unprecedented. No one has ever been involuntarily reactivated after this long a period of civilian service." Helen walked to her window, looking out at the peaceful street where she had spent 7 years learning to be human again. "General, why now? Why are they so desperate to get me back?" "Because you embarrassed them. When you made those 3 shots to save 12 lives, you exposed a fundamental weakness in their current capabilities. They don't have anyone who can do what you do. So they're going to force me back into service?" "They're going to try. But Helen, there's something else. Something that makes this even more complicated." Helen felt a chill of apprehension. "What are you talking about?" "The Pentagon has received intelligence about a terrorist operation that's being planned for next month. Multiple targets, coordinated attacks, and the intelligence suggests they're going to use snipers positioned at extreme ranges." "How extreme?" "Ranges that exceed the capabilities of any active-duty sniper currently in service. Ranges that would require someone with your unique abilities to counter." Helen closed her eyes, understanding the implications. "They're not just recalling me for general service. They're recalling me for a specific mission." "Helen, I can't confirm the details, but the intelligence suggests this terrorist operation could result in hundreds of casualties. Maybe thousands. And they think I'm the only one who can stop it. Helen, I think you're the only one who can stop it." Helen was quiet for a long moment. "General, I need to think about this. You have 72 hours to report for duty. If you don't, I know what happens if I don't." Helen hung up the phone and sat in her kitchen, staring at the reactivation order. An hour later, she was at the Willowbrook Community Library, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while her world collapsed. Around her, the media circus from the previous week had died down, but she could still feel the weight of public attention every time she left her house. Tyler Jackson appeared at the circulation desk just after lunch, still in his military fatigues. "Mrs. Morrison, I heard about the reactivation order. The whole base is talking about it." Helen looked up from the book she was checking in. "Tyler, I'm not sure what you're talking about." "Ma'am, with respect, everyone knows. The Pentagon is forcing you back into active duty." Helen set down the book and studied the young soldier she had watched grow from a nervous recruit into a confident military professional. "Tyler, what do you think I should do?" "Ma'am, I think you should do whatever you think is right. But I also think you should know that every soldier on that base would follow you anywhere." "Tyler, I'm not a leader. I'm a specialist. I make difficult shots, that's all." "Ma'am, you're wrong. You're not just someone who makes difficult shots. You're someone who makes impossible shots to save lives. That's leadership." Helen walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where she could see two black SUVs that had been there all morning. Tyler, what if I don't want to go back? What if I want to stay here and continue being a librarian? Then you'd still be my hero, Mrs. Morrison, but you'd also be someone who chose personal peace over public service. The words hit Helen like a physical blow. Tyler, that's not fair. Ma'am, fairness doesn't have anything to do with it. You have abilities that other people don't have. Abilities that could save lives. And what about my life? What about my right to live peacefully? Tyler was quiet for a moment. Ma'am, I don't know the answer to that. But I know that if there are people who need saving, and you're the only one who can save them, then maybe your peace is less important than their lives. Helen stared at the young soldier, seeing herself at his age idealistic, dedicated, and absolutely certain about the difference between right and wrong. Tyler, when did you become so wise? When I started reading the books you recommended, ma'am. Books about heroes who make hard choices. That evening, Helen sat in her garden, surrounded by the vegetables she had planted and tended for 7 years. This garden had been her sanctuary, her proof that she could create life instead of taking it. Now she was being asked to abandon it, to return to a world where her primary function was to end lives in order to save them. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Mrs. Morrison, this is Colonel Mitchell from Camp Thunderbolt. I'm calling to ask you not to report for reactivation. Helen was surprised. Colonel, I don't understand. Ma'am, I've been ordered to tell you that if you report for duty, you'll be assigned to a classified operation that will likely result in your death. The mission they're planning requires someone with your capabilities, but the survival probability is essentially 0. Colonel, are you telling me that the Pentagon is planning to send me on a suicide mission? Ma'am, I'm telling you that the Pentagon is planning to send you on a mission that requires your unique abilities, and the nature of that mission makes survival unlikely. Helen sat in silence, processing the implications. Colonel, why are you telling me this? Because you saved 12 lives, including soldiers under my command. Because you've earned the right to know what you're being asked to do. And because I don't think the Pentagon has the right to force you back into service, just to send you on a mission that will kill you. What's the mission? I can't tell you the details, but I can tell you that it involves countering a terrorist sniper operation at ranges that exceed anything you've ever attempted. Helen looked at her garden, at the tomatoes she wouldn't be here to harvest, at the peaceful life she had built from the ashes of her military service. Colonel, what do you think I should do? Ma'am, I think you should make the choice that lets you live with yourself, whether that's reporting for duty or refusing the reactivation order. And if I refuse, then you'll be arrested, court-martialed, and probably sent to military prison. But you'll be alive. Helen hung up the phone and sat in her garden as the sun set over Willowbrook. In 48 hours, she would have to make a decision that would determine not just her own fate, but potentially the fate of hundreds or thousands of people she had never met. The librarian who had spent 7 years learning to be human again was about to discover whether she was still capable of being Phantom One when the world needed her most. Tomorrow, she would have to choose between peace and duty, between the life she had built and the life she had left behind. Between being Helen Morrison, Librarian, and being Phantom One, the most dangerous woman in America. Helen Morrison woke up on Saturday morning to find 57 military veterans standing in formation on her front lawn. They had driven from across the state, wearing their service uniforms, carrying signs that read, "We stand with Phantom One, and heroes don't deserve forced service." Leading the group was Master Sergeant Carlos Rivera, a man Helen had never met but who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He approached her front door with the bearing of someone who had made his own difficult choices about duty and conscience. "Ma'am," Rivera said when Helen opened her door, "we're here to support your right to choose your own service. Helen looked at the assembled veterans, men and women of all ages who had answered the call to duty and earned the right to peaceful retirement. "Sergeant, I appreciate this, but I don't want to cause trouble for anyone." "Ma'am, you're not causing trouble. The Pentagon is causing trouble by trying to force a retired hero back into service for a suicide mission." "How did you know about the mission?" Rivera smiled grimly. "Ma'am, the military community is small. Word gets around, especially when it involves someone with your reputation." At that moment, 3 news vans pulled up, followed by more cars carrying veterans from neighboring states. Within 2 hours, Helen's quiet street had become the center of a national controversy about veterans' rights, military service, and the government's authority to recall retired soldiers. Tyler Jackson appeared at her door around noon, no longer in uniform but wearing civilian clothes that made him look younger than his 20 years. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to apologize for what I said yesterday about your peace being less important than other people's lives." Helen invited him in, closing the door against the growing crowd outside. "Tyler, you were speaking from your heart. I respect that." "Ma'am, I was speaking from ignorance. I've never been in combat. I've never had to make the kind of choices you've made. I had no right to judge your decision." Helen poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from the young soldier at her kitchen table. "Tyler, what changed your mind?" "I talked to Sergeant Rivera. He told me about the mission they're planning to send you on." "Ma'am, they're asking you to counter-snipe against 12 terrorist snipers positioned at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters in urban terrain, with civilian populations in the crossfire." Helen's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. "12 targets?" "Yes, ma'am. 12 simultaneous shots, all at extreme range, all requiring precision that would prevent civilian casualties. According to the intelligence, you'd have maybe 30 seconds to neutralize all targets before they begin firing into crowds." Helen set down her coffee cup. "Tyler, that's not a mission. That's a mathematical impossibility." "Ma'am, that's what everyone is saying. Except the Pentagon. They seem to think you can do it." "Tyler, I'm good. I'm very good. But I'm not superhuman. 12 simultaneous shots at 3,000-meter ranges? Even with perfect conditions, the probability of success is essentially 0. "Ma'am, then why are they so insistent on recalling you?" Helen walked to her window, looking out at the veterans who had gathered to support her. "Tyler, I think they're recalling me because they don't have any other options. And they'd rather send one person on a suicide mission than admit they can't handle the threat." Tyler joined her at the window. "Ma'am, what are you going to do?" "I don't know." At that moment, Helen's phone rang. The caller ID showed General Stone's number. "Helen, you need to see the news, right now." Helen turned on her television to find CNN running a breaking news story. The banner read, "Pentagon documents leaked. Phantom 1 mission details revealed." The reporter was standing in front of the Pentagon, holding a thick folder of documents. These classified documents, obtained by an unnamed source within the Department of Defense, reveal that the Pentagon is planning to send retired sniper Helen Morrison on what military experts are calling a mathematically impossible mission. The screen showed tactical diagrams, intelligence reports, and mission parameters that made Helen's blood run cold. The terrorist operation was even more complex than Tyler had described. 12 snipers positioned throughout Washington, D.C., planning to fire simultaneously into crowds during a major public event. According to these documents, the reporter continued, the Pentagon believes that Helen Morrison, codename Phantom 1, is the only person capable of neutralizing all 12 targets within the 30-second window before they begin firing into civilian populations. The screen switched to an interview with Dr. Patricia Williams, a military tactics expert from West Point. What the Pentagon is asking Mrs. Morrison to do is beyond human capability. Even with her legendary skills, the probability of successfully Completing this mission is less than 0.01%. Dr. Williams, if the mission is impossible, why is the Pentagon so insistent on recalling her? Because they don't have any other options. Traditional assault teams can't reach the sniper positions without triggering the attack. Drone strikes would cause massive civilian casualties. The only theoretical solution is a counter-sniper operation by someone with Mrs. Morrison's unique capabilities. And if she refuses, then hundreds, possibly thousands of people will die. Helen turned off the television and sat in stunned silence. The leaked documents had revealed not just the details of the mission, but the impossible choice she was being forced to make. Tyler sat beside her. "Ma'am, I understand now why you don't want to go back." "Tyler, it's not that I don't want to go back. It's that I know what they're asking me to do is impossible. And I know that when I fail, not if, when those people will die anyway." "Ma'am, what if you don't fail?" Helen looked at the young soldier who had become like a son to her during his visits to the library. "Tyler, I've made impossible shots before. But this isn't just impossible, it's 12 impossible shots in 30 seconds. Even if I could make each shot individually, the time constraints alone make it mathematically impossible." "Ma'am, but what if?" "Tyler, there is no what if. This is a suicide mission disguised as a rescue operation. The Pentagon is asking me to sacrifice my life to make them look like they tried to do something." Helen's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Captain Jennifer Reed from the Pentagon. I need to speak with you immediately about the leaked documents." Helen showed the text to Tyler. "Tyler, I think the Pentagon is about to make me an offer I can't refuse." "What kind of offer?" "The kind that involves either accepting a suicide mission or being arrested for treason." As if summoned by her words, 2 black SUVs pulled up outside her house. Military police officers emerged, wearing full tactical gear and carrying weapons. "Move to the window." "Ma'am, I think they're here to arrest you." Helen looked at the MP officers forming up outside her house, then at the veterans who had come to support her, then at the young soldier who had become her unlikely ally. "Tyler, I want you to do something for me. Anything, ma'am. I want you to remember that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is refuse to be a hero." Helen walked to her closet and pulled out a small bag that had been packed for 7 years, her emergency bag, containing everything she would need if she ever had to become Phantom 1 again. "Ma'am, where are you going?" "Tyler, I'm going to do what I should have done 7 years ago. I'm going to disappear." As the military police officers approached her front door, Helen Morrison walked out the back door of her house and into the woods behind her garden. The woman who had spent 7 years learning to be human again was about to become a ghost once more. But this time, she wasn't running toward a mission. She was running away from one. The most dangerous woman in America had just decided to become the most wanted woman in America. Helen Morrison had been living in the abandoned ranger station for 3 days when General Stone found her. The old facility, hidden deep in the Appalachian Mountains, had been her fallback position since she moved to Willowbrook, a place where Phantom 1 could disappear if Helen Morrison's world collapsed. "I figured you'd be here," General Stone said, emerging from the tree line with her hands visible and empty. "This was always your preferred hiding spot during survival training." Helen looked up from the tactical map she was studying, her civilian clothes replaced by military fatigues that had been stored in the station's emergency cache. "General, how did you find me?" "Because I know how you think. And because I need to tell you that everything has changed." Helen gestured to a camp chair beside the small table where she had been planning her next move. "General, if you're here to convince me to surrender, you're wasting your time. I'm here to tell you that the Pentagon investigation has been shut down. The officials who ordered your reactivation have been relieved of duty, and the impossible mission has been canceled." Helen stopped studying her map. "What are you talking about?" General Stone opened a briefcase and pulled out a folder, marked with the highest classification levels. Helen, the leaked documents you saw on the news? They weren't leaked by a whistleblower. They were released by a group of Pentagon officials who were trying to stop the suicide mission. I don't understand. The reactivation order came from a small group of officials who were trying to cover up their own failures. The terrorist threat was real, but the mission they designed was intended to fail. They wanted to sacrifice you to make themselves look like they had tried to do something. Helen leaned back in her chair. General, are you telling me that the Pentagon was planning to send me on a suicide mission to cover up their own incompetence? I'm telling you that a small group of officials was planning to do that. But they've been exposed, and they're facing court-martial for conspiracy and endangering national security. General Stone opened the folder and showed Helen a series of documents. These are the real intelligence reports about the terrorist operation. The threat was neutralized by a joint FBI-CIA operation 2 days ago. All 12 terrorist snipers were arrested before they could reach their positions. Helen stared at the documents. Then why was I being recalled? Because the officials who ordered your reactivation knew the threat had been neutralized. They wanted to use you as a scapegoat for their failures in identifying the threat earlier. General, that's insane. Helen, it's politics. They were facing congressional investigations about intelligence failures. They thought they could deflect attention by creating a heroic narrative about recalling America's greatest sniper. To save the day. Helen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains where she had spent 3 days planning her escape from a life she had never asked to return to. General, what happens now? Now you have a choice. You can remain in hiding, living as a fugitive for the rest of your life. Or you can come back and help us build something better. What do you mean? General Stone pulled out another document. Helen, your disappearance has sparked a national conversation about veterans' rights and the government's authority to recall retired soldiers. Congress is drafting legislation to prevent involuntary reactivation except in cases of genuine national emergency. The Morrison Act? The Morrison Act, named after a librarian who reminded America that heroes have the right to choose their own service. Helen returned to her chair. General, I still don't want to go back to active duty. Helen, I'm not asking you to go back to active duty. I'm asking you to help us create a new program, a voluntary reserve program for retired specialists who want to serve their country without being forced into service. What kind of program? A program where experienced veterans can choose to serve in emergency situations with full control over their deployment and mission parameters. No involuntary reactivation, no impossible missions, no political manipulation. Helen considered the proposal. General, what would that look like? It would look like Helen Morrison, consulting instructor for advanced marksmanship, helping to train the next generation of snipers. It would look like Phantom 1, available for genuine emergency situations that require her unique skills, but only when she chooses to serve. And if I refuse? Then you remain a retired librarian who helped save 12 lives and inspired a national conversation about veterans' rights. No charges, no court-martial, no consequences. Helen looked at the tactical map she had been studying, then at the documents that revealed the truth about the conspiracy against her. General, there's something I need to know. The officials who ordered my reactivation, what happens to them? They're facing charges for conspiracy, abuse of authority, and endangering national security. The evidence against them is overwhelming. And the veterans who supported me? They're being hailed as heroes for standing up to government overreach. Several of them have been offered positions in the new voluntary reserve program. Helen smiled for the first time in 3 days. General Tyler Jackson, the young soldier who was visiting my library, is he okay? He's fine. In fact, he's been asking about you. He wants to know if you're coming back to finish helping him with his research on quantum physics. Helen laughed. General, I think I'd like to go home now. Helen, are you sure? Once you come back, you'll never be able to disappear again. The world knows who you are now. General, I was never really hiding. I was just living quietly. There's a difference. Helen began packing her gear, transforming once again from Phantom 1 back to Helen Morrison. General, I want to make something clear. I'm coming back as Helen Morrison, Librarian. Not as Phantom 1, legendary sniper, understood. But Helen, what if the world needs Phantom 1 again? Helen shouldered her pack and looked around the ranger station that had been her refuge for 3 days. General, Phantom 1 never really retired. She just learned to read stories to children and help teenagers with their homework. If the world needs her again, she'd be there. And if the world needs Helen Morrison, then she'll be at the Willowbrook Community Library, helping people find the books they need and reminding everyone that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. As they walked out of the mountains together, General Stone asked one final question. Helen, do you regret anything that happened? Helen looked back at the ranger station, then ahead toward the road that would take her home to Willowbrook. General, I regret that it took a conspiracy to remind people that veterans have the right to choose their own service. But I don't regret standing up for that right. And the mission you refused? General, I didn't refuse a mission. I refused to be sacrificed for someone else's political ambitions. There's a difference. Helen Morrison, the librarian who had reminded America that heroes have the right to choose their own service, was going home. The woman who had spent 7 years learning to be human again had discovered that being human didn't mean giving up her extraordinary abilities. It meant choosing when and how to use them. Tomorrow she would return to her library, her books, and her quiet life. But now she would return as someone the world recognized as both Helen Morrison and Phantom 1, a legend who had chosen to serve her community by reading stories to children and helping people find the information they needed. The most dangerous woman in America had become the most respected woman in America. And she was ready to go back to being a librarian. 6 months after Helen Morrison returned to Willowbrook, the small town had become a pilgrimage site for veterans across America. They came not to see a legendary sniper, but to visit a library where a hero had chosen to serve her community by reading stories to children and helping people find the books they needed. Helen stood at the circulation desk on a Tuesday morning, checking out books to Mrs. Patterson, who had become something of a local celebrity herself as the woman who knew Phantom 1 when she was just the librarian. Helen, dear, Mrs. Patterson said, accepting her stack of romance novels. Are you sure you don't miss the excitement of your old life? Helen smiled, adjusting her reading glasses. Mrs. Patterson, yesterday I helped Tommy Walsh find a book about quantum entanglement that changed his understanding of physics. Last week, I read a story about a brave little rabbit to 15 kindergartners who were learning about courage. If that's not excitement, I don't know what is. The library had expanded since Helen's return. The Morrison Wing, funded by donations from around the world, housed a new Veterans Resource Center and a collection of military history books that had become one of the most comprehensive in the country. But Helen's favorite addition was the children's section, which had been enlarged to accommodate the growing number of families who came to hear the legendary Phantom 1 read stories to their children. Tyler Jackson appeared at the circulation desk, now wearing the chevrons of a corporal and carrying a stack of books about advanced mathematics. Mrs. Morrison, I'm shipping out to Germany next month. I wanted to thank you for everything you've taught me. Helen looked at the young soldier who had become like a son to her. Tyler, you learned those things yourself. I just helped you find the right books. Ma'am, you did more than that. You taught me that being a hero isn't about having extraordinary abilities. It's about choosing to use whatever abilities you have to help other people. Tyler, you're going to do great things in Germany. And when you come back, I'll be here to help you find whatever books you need for your next adventure. As Tyler left, Helen noticed a familiar figure approaching the library. Colonel Mitchell walked through the front doors, no longer in military uniform, but wearing the casual clothes of a civilian contractor. He had retired from active duty 6 months earlier and now worked as a consultant for the Morrison Foundation, the non-profit organization that had been established to support veterans' transition to civilian life. "Helen, I have some news you'll want to hear," Colonel Mitchell said, approaching the circulation desk. "The Morrison Act passed the Senate yesterday. It's heading to the President's desk for signature." Helen looked up from her computer. "James, what does that mean?" "It means that no veteran can ever again be involuntarily recalled to active duty, except in cases of genuine national emergency declared by Congress. It means that what happened to you can never happen to anyone else." Helen was quiet for a moment. "James, I hope future veterans never have to make the choice I had to make." "Helen, you didn't just make a choice for yourself. You made a choice for every veteran who served their country and earned the right to peaceful retirement." That afternoon, Helen was preparing for story time when she received a phone call that would change everything once again. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Captain Jennifer Reed from the Pentagon. I'm calling with a request." Helen felt a familiar chill. "Captain, I hope this isn't about reactivation." "No, ma'am. It's about education. We have a situation in Afghanistan where our sniper teams are encountering challenges that exceed their current training. We were hoping you might be willing to conduct some voluntary training sessions." Helen walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful street where children were walking home from school. "Captain, what kind of training?" "Advanced marksmanship techniques, extreme range calculations, and psychological preparation for high-stress situations. The training would be conducted here in the States, entirely voluntary, and you would have complete control over the curriculum." Helen considered the request. "Captain, how many soldiers would be involved?" "Initially, 12 snipers from our elite units. If the program is successful, we'd like to expand it to include instructors who could teach these techniques to others." "And this is completely voluntary?" "Yes, ma'am. You would be a civilian contractor, not recalled to active duty. You would choose your own schedule, your own methods, and your own students." Helen looked at the children's book she had arranged for story time. "Captain, I need to think about this." "Of course, ma'am." "But Helen, these soldiers are facing challenges that require your unique expertise. They're not asking you to go back to war. They're asking you to help them come home alive." That evening, Helen sat in her garden, surrounded by the vegetables she had planted and tended for 8 years. This garden had been her sanctuary, her proof that she could create life instead of taking it. Now she was being asked to help others preserve life by teaching them to take it more effectively. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Mrs. Morrison, I heard about the training opportunity. Whatever you decide, I'm proud to know you." Another text from Tommy Walsh. "Mrs. Morrison, if you decide to help train those soldiers, you should know that you'll still be my hero. Heroes don't retire, they just find new ways to serve." Helen looked at her phone, then at her garden, then at the house where she had spent 8 years learning to be human again. She had discovered that being human didn't mean giving up her extraordinary abilities. It meant choosing when and how to use them. The next morning, Helen Morrison walked into the Willowbrook Community Library and called Captain Reed. "Captain, I'll take the training assignment on one condition." "What's that, ma'am?" "The training takes place here in Willowbrook. The soldiers come to me, not the other way around. And every evening, after training, they attend story time with the local children." Captain Reed was quiet for a moment. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand." "Captain, I want them to remember why they're learning these skills. It's not to become more efficient killers. It's to protect the innocence and wonder of children who believe in heroes." "Ma'am, I think we can arrange that." Helen hung up the phone and walked to the children's section, where 15 kindergartners were waiting for their Tuesday morning story. She picked up a book about a brave little rabbit who saves his family from danger and began reading in the same calm, controlled voice she had used to coordinate rescue operations and train the world's most skilled snipers. Once upon a time, there was a little rabbit who lived in a peaceful meadow. Helen Morrison had found her perfect balance. She was Phantom 1, the legendary sniper who could make impossible shots to save lives. She was Helen Morrison, the librarian, who read stories to children and helped people find the books they needed. She was a teacher who would help the next generation of soldiers come home alive. But most of all, she was a woman who had learned that true heroism isn't about having extraordinary abilities. It's about choosing to use whatever abilities you have to serve others. The most dangerous woman in America had become the most valuable woman in America. And she was exactly where she belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.